All right. I have never been known to be able to stick to a time limit, so I will do my best. First of all, thank you very much for inviting, for organizing this conference and for inviting me to come. It is a pleasure, but you know the expression, hamatchil b'mitzvah omrim lo gmor, or as the Yerushalmi puts it, omrim lo marak. And I've never quite understood why soup should follow. I actually found that in a dictionary, an online dictionary, that marak, which means finish, is understood as soup. But in any case, in this case, there's a particular meaning for that, because the pshat is that I begin this conference, and I'm also the chairman at almost the last session. So, you know, matchil b'mitzvah. But there's a real drash, or perhaps sod meaning to this with my regard, because I was here 6 years ago in a different room, and I gave the same talk. Now, I've changed it a little bit, but because I started, I'm assuming that I'm allowed to finish it, right? The irony is I'm not sure I'm finished with the research, but I hope that if anybody was there, I hope you will enjoy this new version of it. Let me start out. I want to deal with a problem that, hello? There we go. Yeah. All right. What I'd like to do, if we could, is to begin with a problem in talking about Jewish economic history. The truth is that what we look for, Orly started the conference by citing Nachum Gross, who in fact was my first teacher in economic Jewish history. And one of the points that he made then, he was an economist, he was an economic historian, but he was trained as an economist. And for Jewish historians to enter into economic history was a very slow process, because we were always very uncomfortable with it. It seemed like we were raising bad memories about Jews being accused of certain kind of behavior and things like that. Now, what happens in Jewish economic history usually is that people look for specific kinds of Jewish economic specialization. In fact, that's not what we're doing. What we should be doing is looking for Jews and how they act economically. Now, let me see if I can explain what I mean by that. It's not just a question of avoiding stereotypes. Now, somebody will say, oh, Jews love money, or Jews do money lending, or Jews do something like that. And that's not the thing we're just trying to avoid. It's rather the problem here is fundamental to the nature of Jewish historical writing. When we write about Jews, we have already made a decision to take those Jews out of the entire society within which they live and to decide that we can say something about their economic activity as Jews. And I would like to make the argument that this is more or less a circular kind of argument. We pick the Jews out of the community. We then talk about how they make their living, and then we say, well, why did Jews specialize in this? Either because they were pushed into these areas, Jews did money lending because somebody else made them do it, or because they did this selected kind of economic activity, the rest of the society hated them and therefore pushed them aside. But one way or another, you see, it's a circular argument. You pick your Jews out in the first place, then you attach to them certain kinds of economic behavior, and then you use that economic behavior to justify why the Jews are a separate subject within the entire society. And that is a problematic kind of argument. So I would argue that more important than any specific that can come out of this conference, if we can raise the issue of how do you deal with Jews as part of the society within which they live, and yet in some sense to be a valid subject for separate historical discourse and analysis, that is the problem that we face, and that is the challenge that I hope to rise to. And by the way, it doesn't matter why you think Jews were separate. You can use a Kuznetzian argument and say the Jews are ethnically separate from a general society and are marginalized marginalized economically because of it, or we're going to hear in the last section about the new book, The Chosen Few, an argument basically about the social capital that derives from the from the cultural activities of the Jews. It doesn't matter whether you see it as external or internal, as ethnic or cultural, that selection process begs the question. In economics, it strikes me, people act as members of an economy. They are subject to the general rules of economic behavior. Only afterwards can we make some kind of an argument about what is special or what is relevant to Jewish history about that. So I'm not sure I've made a point. I'm not sure I make much sense. I'm still suffering from jet lag. But let me try. Does everybody understand me, by the way? Does this make sense? Yeah, more or less. Okay. אני יכול לדבר בעברית, possiamo in italiano, quello che vuoi, okay? So I want to give you 3 examples of the same case, and I want to try to make my argument. The first example is going to be an appeal by a young man, maybe not so young by this point, but a man in his 30s named David da Sicilia. David da Sicilia in 1539 appeals to the government, and you'll see what, and we're going to talk about his case and his bank in Rome. Then we're going to go on to an appeal 3 years later to the Kriya. The Kriya is the name of the convenio, or the council of the leadership of the Jewish community of Rome. I don't know anywhere else that they use that term, but in Rome they called the Jewish council, the Kahal was called, in other places it's called the Va'ad, other things, in Rome it's called the Kriya. And then we are going to look at the constitution of the Jewish community, in fact the earliest constitution of the Jewish community in Italy from 1524. Okay, so let's look at these one after another. Now, these documents, I want you to understand that in Rome we have an unusual circumstance. We have notarial documents that were preserved. They are preserved in the archive of the state itself. These are notarial documents. Everybody knows what a notary does. A notary confirms that a certain thing happened and writes it down for a record. We have these records in the 16th century written in Hebrew. They will eventually come to be written in Italian, but in the 16th century they're written in Hebrew, and these are now in the Archivio Capitolino in Rome, and you can work on them there. Kenneth Stowe published Regesta of these, some of these many years ago. The second thing that we have is we have copies of the Capitulations of Rome. The one I'm going to show you is found in Harvard's Houghton Library. So we have these records, but we also have a huge number of records in the Archivi di Stato of Rome. So there's a tremendous amount of information about the Jews in the state archives. And then we also have tshuvot. Right? There weren't a lot of tshuvot written in Rome that have been preserved. But luckily, the tshuvot of a man named Yitzhak de Lattis, we have his autograph, it may be his son-in-law's autograph, a copy of his tshuvot. They were never published in his lifetime. A section of them was published in the 19th century. I have published a few more since then. But we have tshuvot. So in other words, what we have are notarial documents, government documents, and tshuvot about the same case, which means that we can look at this case from different perspectives, and that tells us an enormous amount. Because when you read a tshuva, you should know it's being written from the point of view of a rabbi. And we'll have to see what a rabbi might be. When you read a government document, it's written from the point of view of a government official. When you read a personal notarized document, it's written from the point of view of the parties involved. So these are very different things, and it's very rare to have this chance. Okay, so let's quickly now move on. The first document we have is the tshuva. In this tshuva, our Rabbi de Lattis makes a point that I'm not sure that you're going to be able to read it clearly. If I move away from the microphone, you can still hear me? Yes. Yeah? Okay. So this is, here's another microphone here. Divrei Tlunot David de Sicilia, Yishmael Tzoro V'Yatzileo. These are the words of the complaint of David de Sicilia. and he is appealing al esrim hamalvim hamuchzakim. Pay attention to the word muchzakim. If I pick it up, you can hear it.
No, the translation.
Hello? They can't hear it. Okay, so let me go back here. Sorry. Okay, so what he says is that he is appealing the fact that the 20 malvim, the 20 moneylenders who are muchzakim. The word muchzakim gives you the idea of a chazakah. It gives you the idea of some kind of internal Jewish tradition. But the word is actually a reference to their license, and that is important. So the first thing I want you to notice is that in this text of a tshuva, that which is a license issued by the government to only 20 people who are allowed to lend money at interest in Rome are now called muchzakim. We use a Hebrew term to change it. And then we hear, Shamati, I've heard his complaint, Ve'ir uro alehem, ki miyamei kedem haya aviv meha esrim harishonim. He complains that his father had been one of the first 20 bankers licensed in Rome. That was in 1521. And one of the conditions of that license was that children should be able to inherit their parents' license. And he complains that the 20 have stolen his father's license, and he should have the right to get it back. And he talks about the fact that they are machzikim, they have grabbed. Now here the word chazakah means that they're holding on to his license, and so forth. So the first thing I want you to see here is this shift in language, that the same term in different genres has a different connotation. The young man is appealing his father's bank. He wants his father's bank back. Take a look, if you will, at this next page. This next slide is the bottom of the same page in the tshuva, right? So we're looking at Yitzchak Delatis, and look what he says here. He says, how can he ask for that chazakah back when he himself signed a document in which he said that he's giving it up? And in this document he says, and here you can see the Rabbi Delatis is writing in the Hebrew tshuva the Italian copied from the document that the appellant wrote in Italian, and me confesso aver liberato et, I can't, it's a little hard to read to me, e concesso il mio loco, et cetera, perhaps, I'm not quite sure how to read that, e prometto mai per nullo tempo godere ne far godere il supradito loco, anzi lo recusano, no, one second. Damo, and mo is Roman for right now. Et cedolo ali vinti. He has signed a piece of paper where he says, I give up. I give it completely to those people. Now, why did he write it in Italian? Because it turns out that this document was something he wrote when he appealed, before he appealed to the rabbi, he appealed to the court of the governor of Rome. And that court said it had no jurisdiction, and it passed it on to the Camerlengo of Rome. The Camerlengo of Rome is the chamberlain of the popes, and it had the right to issue the licenses, and it decided against him. And he signed this document. So in other words, not only is this a question of different languages in different genres, but in fact, this man, David de Sicilia, has appealed to multiple jurisdictions for the same case. And here's the main point. I'm going to run out of time, so I'll try to make it short here and move on to the second document. What we see is that David de Sicilia, in fact, has appealed his right to a number of courts. He has gone from place to place. He ends up in a rabbinical court only as a matter of last resort. And in the rabbinical court, they decide on this economic issue based on the legal requirements of the outside government and what he has signed in the outside government's papers. Okay? So that's one element. Let me move on to a second case, and something that is very, very strange. This is from the notarial documents of the Roman Jewish community. They are now, as I said, in the Archivio Capitolino. In this document, I won't try to read it to you, but in this document, which dates from 1542, we learn that three people, Moses de Cameo, Joseph Babbo, and Salomon Lancian, appear before the Kriya and demand, and here is the strange thing, they demand that the Kriya, I was hoping to make it bigger, but I'm afraid it won't be legible anyway. They demand from the Kriya to do one of two things. Either to abolish money lending in Rome, or to open it up to everybody. Now, what is going on here? Three people show up and say it is not right that there is money lending in Rome, abolish it. They come to the Jewish community, three Jews come to the Jewish community and say abolish it. You realize Jewish money lending isn't licensed by the Jewish community, it's licensed by the government. Why would they come to the Jewish community and say abolish money lending? But if they're saying it, probably they don't approve of it. No, because they say, or let every Jew do it, because we should all make a living. Doesn't make any sense. And most important, why are they appealing to the Jewish, first of all, what do they want? But second of all, why are they appealing to the Jewish government? So I leave you with this strange fact, okay, that there's a contradiction in the text. Okay, let's quickly move on to the third document. This is the Capitoli of the Jewish community of Rome in 1524. And in this text, this is the text from the Harvard Library. The text was originally published by Attilio Milano many, many years ago in 1937. The manuscript that he had in his library has recently come up again and is going to be worked on again. There is also a copy that Serena Dinepi found in the Archivio di Stato in Rome. But this one is very interesting, this manuscript. It says, these are, what is here below are the capitoli, that is the chapters or the regulations and ordinations and statutes and reformations of how the Jewish community should be run, composed by Daniel de Isaac de Pisa, who was elected and nominated by the University of the Jews of Rome, and, by the university, meaning the community of Roman Jews, and the Ultramontani. So in other words, there are now two Jewish communities, or there is a university made up of two separate Jewish communities, one of Roman Jews and one of Jews from elsewhere, who have now come, and they are now appointing a leadership community. All the articles that have been written about this assume that the reason for that creation, why suddenly in 1524 did the Jewish community of Rome have to create a leadership? Why did it have to appoint new, or why did it have to write new rules? Why did it have to organize itself? And the answer was, everybody knew, because Jews hate each other. Halacha Moshe Sinai, you know, one Jew hates another Jew. What we have here are Roman Jews and Ultramontane Jews, and they all hate each other, and therefore they couldn't get along. And Attilio Milano, writing about it, says, of course the Jews always had structures and they always had a government. It's just that the Sephardim came and nobody could get along. Sephardim, Italians, they don't like each other. Never mind Ashkenazim, we won't even talk about them. They'll come later, and so forth and so on. Okay, so in other words, the assumption is, now notice this is a government that has been approved. If you look down a little bit below there, it says this has already been documented in Hebrew documents, but now the Pope is going to give his imprimatur to this Jewish community. So the Jews write their documents, but then the government assigns them. Okay, let me see, I have about 5 minutes left, so let me see if I can bring these three kinds of texts together together. On the one hand, we find out a young man who is appealing for his bank that his father got as one of the first bankers. In fact, if you take a look here, you can see this document is from that same set of the rules. These are the names of the very first bankers who were part of the Jewish community. And if you notice down here, it says Sabatuccio di Tivoli. That is David da Sicilia's father. That's his father. So he was one of the first bankers, and he was one of the founders of the Jewish community of Rome in 1524. So we have a document from David da Sicilia, his appeal and chuvot and so forth and so on. We have notarial documents where people say, get rid of banking or open it up to everybody. And the third thing is we have the capitulations, and the capitulations specifically say that the community is being reorganized, and we assume for ethnicity, but that's not what it says. It says it will be made up of 60 people. Now imagine a government of 60 people. Can you imagine a government functioning with 120 people? It's impossible, right? We all know that a government of 120 people can't function. How many people in the Knesset? 100. Oh yeah. So if that can't function, believe me, the Roman Jewish community couldn't function with 60 people either. So how could you possibly have a government of 60 people? It's simple. What you have is, you told me 25.
I know. I'm just telling you.
Yeah, I know. I got it right here. Okay. So don't scare me, Moshe. So what do we have? What we have is an unwieldy government. Why was it created in 1524? Not because of ethnic conflict, but because of economic problems. Because in 1521, 20 Jewish bankers were licensed. And those 20 Jewish bankers went to the community and said, hey guys, one of the conditions of our license is we're not subject to the community. And we're among the wealthier people in this community, and you know what? We won't pay taxes. And they said, oh no, let's make you part of the community. So the community is made up of 60 people only to make it 2-to-1 vis-a-vis the bankers. You start with 20. Every Jew who had a license was automatically, every Jewish banker who had a license was automatically part of the community government. And then you have 2 times as many people to balance that out. Then these people begin fighting. So 1521 is the first banking licenses. Why were they issued then? Because Rome is expanding and Jews begin lending money from the small towns. They send runners into Rome to lend money. They send people to find them clients. Come on, I'll get you a loan. I have a friend out in that little town there. They're not allowed to lend in Rome. Finally, the government says, you know what, this is crazy. There's clearly an underground money lending business here, and we're going to legalize it. But in legalizing it, they did something wonderful. They reduced the rate the Jews could charge from 120% per annum to 60% per annum. So the government had a stake in lowering the rates, and they did it by licensing these people. Once they licensed those people went to the community and said, we're now separate from you. Community said, wait, we'll include you in the community. Gave them an official position. That's why in 1524, just a couple of years later, we suddenly get capitulations. It had nothing to do with ethnicity. It has to do with money. Who is rich? Who owns the government? And then people begin appealing. So that we find that by 1540, people are appealing and appealing. People like David da Sicilia are appealing and saying, wait a minute, what happened to my bank? Well, what happened was in 1527, Rome was sacked by the imperial army, and people fled, including David da Sicilia. And the Camerlengo, the governor of the person in charge of the money lending, gave out licenses to local Jews who stayed behind. One of those Jews was a man named Solomon da Pisa, one of the da Pisa brothers, one of the richest Jewish families in Italy, who is now appealing. David da Sicilia says, give me back my license. He goes to one government official, and Solomon da Pisa gets it moved to another jurisdiction. He goes to that guy, he loses the case. He signs that he's lost. Then he goes and appeals to a rabbi. Maybe he'll still make it. So he does it again, another appeal. Then we find out that he moves again from this case in 1524, from the capitulations of 1524, we go to 1539, 1540. That that appeal. And by 1541, there is tremendous opposition to these moneylenders running the Jewish community. So in 1542, I submit that when those three guys appeal to the Kriya and say, get rid of money lending completely, or else let everybody do it, they weren't appealing the licenses. The licenses had nothing to do with the Jewish community. What they are doing is saying to the Jewish community, this arrangement where bankers have a position in the community is unacceptable. It's unacceptable that people, because they have a license to lend money at interest, should therefore be able to run our community. I'm at time, so I will stop here. I will just end with this conclusion. Stop. The conclusion is a very simple one. When Jews operate in the economic field, they operate exactly like everybody else. There's nothing Jewish about what they're doing. But the unique thing about Jews is that they live between systems of law. And like everybody else in this world, when confronted with an economic challenge, they move back and forth. This shapes and reshapes the Jewish law system. It shapes and reshapes the Jewish community. And that is how you see economic Jewish history. Thank you very much.